in the hands of someone who's not experienced building software, you could get fooled into sort of a false sense of security of how stable and secure the product is. Like, security issues are hard to see, like, until there's a problem, which is typically too late. You push some kind of a change and it breaks things, and now your business is relying on it and you can get stuck.
All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of ENO8 Answers. I know it's been a minute. You've been busy completely retooling the entire company, more or less. So excited to be back here, my friend.
Yeah, it's been too long. Lots of exciting changes. A lot of stuff has changed since we did our last episode. So we have a lot to dive into, I think.
Yeah. And I mean, if you were to describe maybe in a sentence or two what fundamentally has changed about not only ENO8, but the landscape in which we're operating, what would you say to folks?
I mean, it's not like really an iterative type of change. It's a very fundamental type of change that we've seen. So it's led us to really examine kind of all parts of how we do what we do, even the process that we use for building and improving products, the design effort, how do we scope, how do we actually execute on the coding, how do we handle testing. All those things have evolved very rapidly, and so and it's going to continue to do so. But obviously the models and the tools available are getting way better, and as they get better, that continues to push further change in the process, right? Because things that are possible now weren't possible maybe a couple of months ago, or they weren't to the level they could be, relied upon, as well as they are today.
Yeah, I mean, and to that point, I think you would admit that the entry or like the door into ENO8 has changed pretty dramatically, right? Where a lot of non-technical founders, people with an idea, maybe semi-technical founders will bring you a vibe coded app because they've got what they think is proof of concept, whatever,
Yeah.
and they want to build a full product out of it. What are the maybe like the dangers or the drawbacks of trying to go to market with a vibe coded app?
I think it would be in the hands of someone who's not experienced building software. You could get fooled into a sort of a false sense of security of how stable and secure the product is. That would be a really easy one, right? Is something looks functional, it seems to work well, and you're amazed about how fast you can think of something that needs to be added and then add that. But you eventually, what we've seen is people eventually hit a wall, right? And building an app using sort of a more like what they call like a vibe code approach, one is it's a very big unlock for a lot of people. So there's an excellent place for it. What it is not is it's not a direct path to production worthy, stable software right now. And I think that's where the danger lies is thinking you have something that's really production grade when you don't. And security is the one that people point to a lot, and I think that one's very valid. The other one that comes to mind is you sort of build things in AI. It's gotten a lot better. It builds the software to work the way that you're wanting it to work. But if you're not experienced building software products, the underlying sort of foundation, the data model, the database, the architecture, those things might be getting close to a point where there's going to be problems, and you may not even know that. And so I think that's a big danger, especially when you sort of like jump the fence from this is a cool proof of concept, or this is a lightweight tool that's used by a handful of people, to something that your business really starts to depend on. That stability becomes a really big deal.
Yeah. And so when you say production grade software, what does that really mean? What does that entail in terms of being ready to go to market and potentially, if you're lucky, to really scale it up to where you have a large user base that depends on that software product?
Yeah, I think it's a handful of things. Security is the big one that we have to point to because the consequences of a problem there are pretty high most of the time. The other one would be stability. So what I've seen happen is people sort of vibe code something and it works in sort of a single user or small user base type of environment. But then when you start to expand that user base, then stability becomes a problem or can become a problem. The other one is the stability of making changes, right? What I see a lot of times is founders or small companies, they have someone who is maybe not a software engineer or experienced in building software products and maintaining sort of production software. They get into this groove of, man, this is so quick. I can just ask Claude to add this feature, add it. And then, but what you risk is destabilizing the product. You push some kind of a change and it breaks things, and now your business is relying on it and you can get stuck. So we've seen that before. They get stuck and now you're really relying on this. And so that could mean, like downtime for your internal users, which could stop processes. It could be downtime for, like end users if your product's built to be more like user facing. And so that stability and some of that isn't just AI driven. Some of that is sort of like DevOps and just good, software development lifecycle practices. But AI can fool you into thinking, man, this is just all easy now. I just ask for this feature, it creates it. And the other thing too is we've seen a lot where there's regressions, right? So you go to change something or fix something, and there will be a regression somewhere else in the software. So that sort of points to the importance of having sort of a good test process where you can sort of verify that there's not like unwanted changes being made that you're unaware of in addition to the changes you're trying to make.
If you have vibe coded a working piece of software, whether it's an app, an internal tool, whatever, but let's say on a small scale, you have vibe coded a tool or a solution that is being used by some amount of user base, like probably a relatively small user base.
Right.
What will it look like, or what will it feel like when you start to hit that kind of Claude wall, right? Like what should a founder be looking out for of like, oh, that might be evidence that like we're not ready for production, or we need to do some hardening or refactoring, or change the architecture. Like what are some warning signs that you would see if you were a founder in that position?
The real dangerous ones are hard to see, right? So like I keep saying it, but like security issues are hard to see, like until there's a problem, which is typically too late. And so that's the one I think is the most dangerous because it doesn't present itself in a way that you can be aware of, ahead of time in a lot of cases. So that one's sort of a silent killer. The other ones would be that like using Claude Code as an example, starting to get into things where Claude is talking about things that you just don't understand, right? Even with you prompting it, tell me about that. What does that mean? It does a pretty good job of explaining things. And if you don't know the answer, being able to ask and get that kind of explanation on stuff. But as you start to get complexity in the system, there's integrations, there's the database that you have to think about. And these vibe coded products oftentimes start with like a very specific sort of vision or purpose. But a lot of times, in most cases, there's a more grand vision behind it. And what they find is that as you start to move down that path, things start grinding and getting like slower. So more loops on trying to go back and add something without breaking other stuff, trying to expand to functionality, and under the hood, AI is kind of creating a spaghetti mess of making it work. So those are some of the signs where like feature development starts to slow, stability starts to slow, regressions start to show up, and then the security stuff that you may not even know about.
I actually have personal experience with exactly what you were just talking about. I've been using this platform tool to try to build an internal like workflow system to help automate certain pieces of, what it is that I do.
Yeah.
And I started out with like I want to be able to like drop something in a Dropbox and then like this flow automates from there. And
Yep.
then that worked. I was like, well, that's really cool. What about if I could do this? And then what about if I could do that? And I started like layering new capabilities on top of it. And then I came back like a week and a half later, and the original flow that I built it for no longer worked because of all these other improvements that I'd made down the line. So I had to go back and, have co-work rebuild the first ingest flow and like all this kind of stuff where, I mean, I got there, but it was like that loop took 2 weeks because I'm not technical.
Yeah.
And for me, it's not designed to be production grade. It's like an internal like tool just really for me, which is
Yeah.
fine. But like I have personal experience with that exact kind of loop where it's like, oh, I just wanted it to do this. I'm like, well, that's cool. Maybe it could do this. Oh, it can do that.
Yeah.
Okay, well then what about this? And then once you start like kind of iterating and adding on to that product vision, it starts to degrade the original thing that you designed it for, and then you got to kind of go back and rebuild all of it.
Yeah. It's sort of a notorious weakness in AI right now. I've had a lot of that experience with like an open claw setup that I've experimented with personally, where I was amazed right out of the gate on how I can give it a workflow or a skill and tell it how to do something, and it does it amazing. And then a few weeks later, I go back and do something simple like, hey, go do that. Something as simple as like go scan my calendar and tell me what's coming up kind of thing. And then it's like, I don't know how to access the calendar, like something super basic like that. Right. And you get caught in sleep, you go back and you fix it. Right. And it works a little bit and then you move on. And I think that's sort of a nature of the AI process, is that you get this massive lift right out of the gate. But as you push down that path, it starts to get slower and slower unless you sort of get more advanced with how you're setting up your process and your rig for, ongoing development. But that kind of leads me to what's the big upside on sort of the vibe code approach? Well, the biggest one is it's never been cheaper and faster to explore concepts and use that process to get clarity on what I want to build and how would it look and how would it function and how do I need to think through sort of the processes that the software would be utilized in. That process before was very time consuming. You needed, a lot of the right types of expertise to help you. It included design. And so now, people who know the business the best or that understand the pain of the problem they're trying to solve the best, they can go straight from the knowledge in their head to sort of a working demo or prototype really, really fast. And there's tremendous value in that. And so even in the circumstances where we've had clients come to us with like a vibe coded product that really shouldn't be picked up and tried to turn into production software, that's not a failure. That's like, this is a really good operating blueprint that you can use to capture requirements and get clarity super fast, which is way more important in the AI world today because actually coding and building it's gotten much faster, easier, and cheaper, but knowing what to build, how to approach building it, being clear on like what you're going to build first and what that roadmap is, that stuff has gotten way more important than it already was.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that gets lost a lot in custom software development is you might have an idea as, somebody in the business that like, I think this is a pain point that would be valuable to solve for a certain number of people, whether it's internal, external, whatever.
Right.
But until you actually like put working software in someone's hands, or at least a demo in someone's hands, like you don't really know for sure whether or not someone might change their behavior in order to adopt this new software or whatever.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that I've always been very impressed by here at ENO8 is that like, we're not just going to build what you say you want. Like you have to prove out the business case. You got to get it in the hands of real potential users, solicit feedback, and really understand, like, are you building the right thing? Right? Like it's not just about can you build it right, can you build it fast, but you need to build the right thing first. And I would agree with you that it seems like this ability to vibe code to prototype, right? To demo prototype level is
Yeah.
awesome because you can really solicit that user feedback and people are like, oh my God, like if you could actually make this happen in this way, you would change the game for, whatever that particular like niche is. And so it does seem like it's incredibly valuable. But one of the things that I wanted to kind of double down on is like, if you have spent a lot of your own time as a founder or, product, visionary, whatever, vibe coding an app to get proof of concept, there is going to be some kind of emotionality tied up in that of like, I'm proud of this thing that I have built to demo,
Yeah.
but it might not be at all what ends up needing to be built from a production grade software perspective.
Yeah.
So how do you manage like the kind of sunk costs, like emotionality of somebody brings you a really cool concept that's been vibe coded, but you've got to do a lot of work on your end to get that to a production grade solution?
I think a couple things. One of the big ones is sort of what I mentioned a second ago, is reassure them that just because we're going to have to basically kind of like rebuild or start fresh doesn't mean that that was wasted time and effort. It was incredibly valuable, in fact. And so I think that's something that when I talk to folks that bring something like that to us, that's something I really try to stress up front, because it's totally true, which is you've already done a lot of the really hard work, the thinking work of understanding the problem, what's the value prop behind it, what does it look like, actual pixels on screen kind of stuff. There's huge value in that. And so I think I try to stress that, like, just because we're going to start fresh, doesn't mean that was wasted effort. And because you've done that work, we can get back to that point on the right foundation way faster and more cost effective than we ever could in the past.
In this new world where someone like me who's completely non-technical in this space can stand up not a production grade app, but can stand up something that like looks and feels like it could be production grade.
Yep.
What is the risk or the danger of maybe overconfidence? Maybe it's better to say like naivete in that space, where why would I pay someone like ENO8 to help me make this production grade when like I can use Claude Code in, natural language to tell it what I want and build it? What's the danger there? And relatedly, what is your place? What is ENO8's place in this new kind of software world?
I think where we add the most value is when things get real, right? Like when I've got a tool that actually has real consequences for something going wrong, that's the entry point, right? Like when a founder or a head of product or a VP within a larger organization, they start using something like Claude Code and they pull together a demo or a proof of concept or something they think might be a real product. If it's small scale and it's simplistic, maybe it does the job right on their own, and that's totally fine. I think where the consequences and the risk go up, that's where you need somebody like us. Because I'll give you a small example. I had a conversation the other day with someone that was sort of considering what would it look like for them to try to start to vibe code some stuff internally. They're not technical. And as soon as I started asking about, they were asking me like, what kinds of risk do you face, like with data and security and that kind of thing. So I just started asking like, well, this system that you're wanting to talk to, is there any sensitive information there, right? Is there documents with, social security cards or, private information? And there was, right? And so, one risk of somebody who really has no experience building this stuff is they kind of go YOLO mode with Claude Code and connect to stuff, and they don't even understand the basic precautions that you need to take to ensure protection of data that you're taking responsibility for. And, another different type of example is, I think, it made big headlines several months ago about a pretty big VC funded, like I think it was a Bay Area software startup. And one of their junior engineers using AI deleted the whole production database and the backups, right? And so, you start using the tools and things go really well. But when the risk goes up, let's say that you start to rely on this heavily for your business, and you have something happen like that, like you delete a production database or you make some kind of change that takes the whole system out and you're a sitting duck, you don't want to be in that situation trying to find help. You need to find what's the right point where this is actually getting real and the consequences are real, and then you need help.
Given how far you can get in vibe coded products, solutions, whatever, and how a lot of the talk that you hear, and I have a lot of friends who are software engineers, and they kind of talk about, this is the chair that I sit in while I watch Claude Code or Codex code for me.
Yep.
What is the role of humans and expertise in this new era of software development and deployment?
Ugh. It fundamentally, it's the same stuff that was important pre-AI. It's just that it's where the bottleneck and key leverage point is now 10 times, 100 times more so than it used to be. And so it starts with, are we building the right thing? Does this even need to be built? I mean, it sounds like just such a simple, basic question to have answered, but you'd be surprised how many times people chase things that they're trying to see, can they build this, or this would be cool to build this, without really thinking through the business case. And so like for us, requirements don't start with like a spec document. They start with a business case, right? So even features on a roadmap for an ongoing product dev team, it starts with a business case before it even turns into a requirement, right? So having the expertise to discern whether you should build something and what's the expected ROI that you're going to get, like how can we measure that? Like what is defining success up front? That's a really basic one. Then you have the architecture element of it. Like, are we building this in a solid way? Which is kind of interesting. I did a little bit of a side note. I mean, more and more, I think people are getting comfortable with not needing to know exactly how all the code works that AI writes, just that it works. And that sounded like something that was super uncomfortable, a couple of years ago. But the reality is that if you look at people and organizations that are just shipping like crazy, there's no way that they're hand reviewing every line of code and they're really having a human understand the details of everything that AI writes. So, so that kind of leads the other part of it is there's creating what are the right artifacts and sort of setup for the AI. That's becoming an expertise lane all on its own, right? And what I mean by that is I find that AI does really good if you give it the right stuff, right? The right direction, the right details, the right architecture plan, the right test cases. If you give it the right context in general and direction, it can hit a target really good. Now the challenge is, how do you get to that point? How do you get to the stuff that we need to be able to provide to AI? And so I think the as I'm talking through this, a really big, more new super skill that's emerging that has massive leverage attached to it is the people who can really understand sort of agentic development and orchestrating multiple agents around objectives, and then getting the requirements, getting the details out of what needs to be built, and then executing that agentically. That's a super skill in today's market.
Can you give me an example of a vibe coded app, whether it's a founder, product leader, VP, whoever, but someone walks into your office with a vibe coded app? Mm-hmm. What kind of questions are they asking you? And then what often is the build path forward?
So we've actually sort of designed a specific process for that because it's happening so often now. I mean, it's what I thought maybe originally was going to be a pretty big threat to our type of business has turned into a really great opportunity. And so whereas ENO8 historically has always been very good at helping clients to get clarity on what is it that we want to build, why are we building it, how will we build it, those kinds of things. and we're still good at that today, which gets amplified with the tools available. But some of that work can be done by the client before they even hit our doorstep, right? And so that shows up as a vibe coded application, right? And so they've done a fair amount of work up to that point of seeing a problem, thinking through what would a potential technology solution to that problem look like, and then even building it out where perhaps it's functional. And so when they show up with us, like a typical path is we would, just it would be a series of conversations to understand what path they've taken so far, what they have. They would usually demo it for us and kind of talk us through it. And then, the first step now is very often some sort of lightweight assessment. Like before we make assumptions, let's actually crack it open and take a look, right? And, in some circumstances, maybe they can continue down their current path for a while, but at a minimum, taking a quick detour to do an assessment can kind of help ensure they're on the right path right now. And then they have better clarity on, is there anything unknown there that's a big risk that we can flush out? And in a really good scenario, maybe, they get input from us that says they can continue on their current path for a certain period of time. And then they know where they're potentially going to start to hit those roadblocks. So it may not turn into an opportunity for us to work together right now until they get a little bit further along, but it's taking risk out of the equation, right? So having an expert really understand the details and give you that feedback, I think, is super valuable, even if you don't hand it over to someone else. But, in most of the circumstances we've seen so far, once we do that assessment, it becomes pretty clear to the client that, like, okay, this is the point where I need to hand it to somebody to really own this. And I'm still going to be the visionary driver behind the problem and how we're solving that with some sort of technology. But one, I don't need to spend all of my time on this, right? Because they probably have some other job function or responsibilities that they need to focus on. Because it can suck you in, right? I don't know if you've experienced it yourself, but I've experienced it firsthand that, like, man, once you start to feel that momentum, it really sucks you in, and it can be very time consuming. So I think that assessment when they show up to us is quickly turning into kind of our go-to starting point. And it doesn't have to be a big, huge engagement, like, a quick look at things to just size it up, give you quick feedback. Then, maybe there's a next step beyond that. And frequently part of that assessment would be, hey, here's your options. If you want to take the feedback from us and continue to address some of that feedback on your own, that is an option. Or here's the plan that if you wanted us to take ownership over this, then this is what it would look like for our team to take it over.
Can you give me like an actual anecdote of like a specific vibe coded app or solution that came to you, and then what you did to take that solution and make it production grade for them?
Yes, we've got some scars to prove it, like, because it's been a little bit of a journey for us too, and it's changed, like rapidly over, 6-8 months. Some of the more early vibe coded products that we took on, we made some mistakes on that we learned from quite a bit. And that, there was one specific example where the founder was a bona fide expert in their field. They really understood the problem very well, very smart person, and got really far using Cursor to build sort of an initial demo. But then he kind of got to that point where he hit the wall, and it's like, I feel like, okay, I'm uncomfortable now, and I need to like find somebody to help kind of hand this off. And so in that particular example, we decided we're going to pick it up and we're going to use the same code base and we're going to get it production ready, right? And, a month or so into it, my developers were really angry with me because they were saying, Jeff, we should have built this fresh, just using the prototype as sort of the working blueprint, basically, for what we're trying to build. And so the big learning from that is that, because AI can get the scaffolding and get that initial burst so well, it's not like in the old days, right, where that would take a long time to get that rolling. You can get there very quick now. So the consequence of sort of saying we're going to start fresh, but we're going to use this as a blueprint for what we're trying to aim at. But we're going to approach building it as software engineers that understand things like, data model and architecture and thinking through that stuff, maybe boring and it's not what people think about when they're setting out to build some kind of product on their own, but that's the foundation, right? So let's go relay the foundation. We've got a lot of this good work from the founder who's already built this sort of demo or this vibe coded app. And so trying to pick up that AI code base and then turn that into something production, in that particular example, that wasn't the right path. And then we had another one around the same time where they had something that they had built, I think using like Replit, and we did start fresh with that one. So we sort of had this A/B test where we could see sort of two different approaches in two similar situations run in parallel, and like we kind of got to see like how we should best approach that. Now that doesn't mean that every time we see one we go throw it away. Because we've got one right now that we're finishing an assessment on, and not only are the tools much more mature, right? But the quality of it is actually fairly decent, but there is some very fundamental things that are going to be problems, and so we will probably stick with that same code base and make those changes and refactor certain fundamental things rather than start from scratch. So some of it depends on what's the scale and complexity of what they've built already and how deeply ingrained the core issues are.
And so, like, do you have any examples of somebody who has brought a vibe coded app to you that you like after working with you, it then goes into true production?
Yes. Yeah, definitely. And I think that we've got, several examples of those. I think, some of the one that I'm thinking about in particular, it was earlier before some of our newer processes have sort of been updated. And so there was a lot of learnings that we took out of that. One of the things that we saw is that we could move really fast. Like when you define it, like something that needed to be done, like a ticket, sort of in the old world, like a ticket that you would hand to a developer following more of an AI assisted approach, which is what we were using sort of like back then. They can go really fast on those things, but we saw a problem with regressions. So you fix something and then it gets ready with an update, and then a feature that was there that was already working, isn't even there, or it fell out. And so it sort of pointed to this need for having this persistent sort of context and this sort of persistent testing automation that has to be in place to really start to fully benefit from AI over a longer period of time, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think the question that I'm driving at though is like, what was the experience like from the founder side, where like they brought you a vibe coded app, and then 4 months later, I mean, I know that you are loath to mention clients by name and solutions by name, but like as best you can you walk me through like a founder brought me this, here's specifically what we did, and then because that we were able to rebuild the architecture and the schema and the whatever, like that then went into production, and now it has 10,000 users, and like these things that we fixed solved the scaling problem for them. So like talk me through it more from like the founder's point of view, walks into your office with a vibe coded product, and then eventually that you got it to production grade in the hands of like real users at scale.
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of two different flavors. Like there's the flavor of the founder or the person who doesn't have any past experience building software. So they probably don't fully appreciate what they're looking at, like the fact that like, oh man, I could build this for a third of the budget now versus what it would have cost a couple of years ago, right? Like I think they hear that and they know that, but unless you've been through that experience and you can sort of see the distinction between like how you can do things now and how you could do things before, I think it's not fully appreciated for that sort of like class of folks. Then there's the other ones that, I think kind of what you're driving at, like we have more examples where it's more of what I would call a brownfield type of scenario, where they have a product that already has users, but they're trying to start to like utilize AI or have our team bring AI into the mix. And, I think the main thing they're seeing there is just sheer velocity, right? It's breakneck velocity. And because they've had to do it the old way and they're starting to see how we can do things now, that gets super exciting, because your roadmap looks way different now than it would have in the past. But that one, I'll say the biggest part of that journey is that it's a learning loop every day, because like every time the tools advance, every time you try a slightly different technique or you tweak your new approach, it's just the learning process, and the iterative learning is almost, if not more important than actually like using AI to try to build software faster right now.
Jeff, like, I want you to talk me through a specific anecdote where somebody brought to you a vibe coded app. This is what we did with this specific app, and now it is in production and serving this many people, right?
I guess the hard thing is that there's not tons of examples to pull from on it, Andrew. So I can do this because they can cut this out. But like the ones that like fall in that class of, they brought us a vibe coded app and we took them to production. VentureLink was the healthcare one. That was the one where he built it with Cursor, and that one was launching a pilot, right? So he launched the initial pilot, like evaluated it, got feedback, came back to us. We scoped like a new SOW to kind of like address and add new things that he needed to sort of go to fully to market. And we're finishing that up later this week. And then he's going to launch 3 more pilots, right? So that's not like huge scale, right? But got the pilot, got the feedback, did another round of changes, getting ready to launch sort of the new update before he sort of fully goes to market. The other one would be like Sip Scout, which is like, basically it's like a happy hour finder app, right? And they've been live. I don't know. They're probably like maybe a couple thousand users kind of thing, right? But the story there is that, that would have been $150,000-$200,000 app. We got it done for like 50 grand, so they got launched. There's another one that we have in the funnel right now that we're doing an assessment on. That was it's more of a small medium-sized business, existing company. Their VP vibe coded a pretty respectable product, but we're assessing it now, and I think it's pretty clear that they're going to hand it to us, and we're going to refactor a lot of the architecture and the data model and all that kind of stuff. And then so it's not going to be big users.
Yeah. So if you are a founder or a VP, what have you, that is moving down the path of vibe coding some sort of software solution, when would you tell them, like, what is the point in time or the obstacle or whatever that, okay, that is now the time for you to bring in some sort of like human expertise in software development to like take this product all the way to the next level?
Yeah. It sort of depends on the circumstance. If it's a lightweight, simple internal tool that 1 or 2 people are going to use, you may not need to do that, right? If it's a tool that's going to be customer facing, or there's real risk on the table of, reputational damage or, an impact to operations, that kind of stuff, before you actually take it live, I think you should be talking to somebody to at least do a review and let you know.